when you see that as a kid, even when it's like a movie in school, like, I feel like I probably checked out. I was like,
Yeah.
like this isn't Final Fantasy 7. Like,
It's hard to
that's all I
appreciate.
cared
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Same, man. I loved Final Fantasy 7 at that time.
Buzz, buzz, babies. Buzz, buzz, babies. Buzz, buzz, babies. Buzz, buzz, babies. All right, buzz, babies, and welcome back to another episode of Blake's Buzz. I have an amazing, talented comic book creator. He writes, he draws, and he scares the hell out of me, honestly. He does some real creepy stuff. I'm so excited. I know a lot of you have probably read some of his stuff before. I think we were all freaking out over Silvercoin not that long ago. Let's bring him out. I got Michael Walsh coming to talk Frankenstein, monsters, and all things creepy and crawly. How you doing today, sir?
I'm great. That was a beautiful intro. Thank you.
Thanks. The second time's the charm.
Yeah. I feel like after you finish, there should be just like a roaring crowd cheering behind you, you know?
But you deserve a lot of applause. Honestly, you are doing some really cool stuff, Michael. And it's funny. I live and breathe comics. I've done press for a while. I've done podcasting a few years now. I work in a production studio during the day, right? So it's life, and I
Mhm.
still stumble across little gems that I've never heard about, and I'm talking about you and Ed's comeback.
Yeah.
Your little crime escapade time traveling tale. Um, I stumbled across that because I was reading something and you mentioned working with Ed a few times, and I was like, what were these few times? I was like, I know the silver coin story. And then I didn't realize you worked on Murder Book with him, which was cool. And then anyways, yeah, I stumbled across Comeback. And I had a blast with that, dude. It was so fun. But I was like, man, you do crime and action really well, right? And I was like, how does the segue, because you just seem to be all horror all the time now. But then I kind of thought, I was like, I was looking at some of the like the gunshots and the death scenes, in Comeback, and they're creepy, they're weird, they're
Mhm.
disturbing to look at, like what you make us like stare down the barrel of an exit wound kind of, right? And it's like, oh, I don't like that angle. It makes and I was like, okay, that's where I think that's where the tendrils of horror were kind of coming out, right? And then, were you like were you already into some of that before, or were because you were what got you like over into the dark side of terror?
I'm a huge horror fan. I grew up a horror fan and one of my favorite movies ever is The Fly. I love body horror and psychological horror, and The Thing is another one of my favorites. And as a reader, I'm a huge reader of manga. Like Junji Ito is one of my favorites ever. Um, and so I always wanted to integrate that stuff into my art a little bit more. So anytime I had a chance, if I was doing a superhero story or a sci-fi story or a noir or even a comedy, I'd try and integrate some of those leanings a little bit just because I always have so much fun drawing them. I get a little bit of this maniacal laughter when I draw something that I know is going to creep somebody out or gross somebody out. And that kind of smile that I get from drawing it is one of the things that like kind of keeps me going, on those long days when you're going to freak someone out with this strange drawing of a tentacle or something, right? Like those are the things that you live for as an artist is just affecting an audience. And I think horror is one of the most fun ways to do that. And just as a fan of the genre, it's something that I enjoy reading, and I always kind of want to make books that I would enjoy as a fan of comics.
Nice. That's the way it should be. There's a scene, just real quick before we talk Frankenstein. There's a scene in Comeback, and it's early on, and it's like it makes sense because of time travel, but at first it got me right because basically like this guy's like tumors like metastasize like instantly over decades or whatever, right? And he like and
Yeah.
it's an amazing scene of body horror, and it's gross and it's weird and but like I said, makes sense in the narrative. But initially, like as a reader, I was like, whoa, like what am I reading? I was like, it took me out, not in a bad way, right? It just was
No,
like
no.
it reminded me that like, well, like Michael and Ed are not going to let me sit comfortably and read this, right? Like, I'm going to have to like be ready. Well, how'd that moment happen? Because that it just seems kind of like an odd moment for the narrative that ended up really working. Was it like in the script? But did you take it like did you ramp it up to 11 a little bit? Like,
Yeah, well, I mean, frankly, it's been so long since we did Comeback. That was the first book I ever did. So I drew that book
Wow.
probably 14 years ago now. So it feels like, God, it feels like a different person drew it. I was just kind of learning the ropes and
You're like,
figuring.
Blake, I don't even know what page you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I know the scene though, because we actually had a lot of discussion about that scene because me and Ed both hadn't had a book get published yet from one of the big publishers, and we really wanted to have the very first sequence be kind of a showstopper where you finish that first 5 or 10 pages, whatever it is, and your jaw kind of drops and goes like, "Whoa, this story is getting dark and intense in ways I wasn't expecting right off the hop." So we had really planned to make it something special. And I think in the script, it was described as his tumors metastasizing really exponentially quickly, and then they cover up his whole body. And without, I don't want to spoil too much, but it gets nasty. Um, so I remember looking up reference of giant metastasized tumors, and it it was very disturbing, and it kind of set a precedent for the rest of my career of looking up very, very disturbing reference for all the horror books that I'm going to work on. So if I die, I hope people know I'm not a serial killer, but my search history is incredibly disturbing.
I've talked to some artists about that, about like even like blood spatter, right?
Yeah.
Or murder weapons, how they look like after, even little things like that, how you can research to like bring about a certain kind of realism to make it. But in doing that research, you stumble into some dark territories, right? Now you're 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 a family guy. Like, is that does it ever get weird when you're doing that kind of research? Like, do you ever have to take a step back and be, like, I'm going to go watch a cartoon, or I'm going to go for a walk, or, get away from the, do you ever go down like too dark a rabbit
Go
hole, I
too
guess?
deep? Do
Yeah.
I go too deep? Um, yeah, but well, for years and years, it didn't really bother me. I feel like I was totally desensitized to it at that point, and it just felt like I'm more of like I could turn off my emotional logical brain for a moment and just think of it as images on a screen instead of what the actual meaning of what was behind those images. But now I feel like after having my own child that I'm very affected and triggered by violence against kids or any kind of like children dying and parents living kind of thing just totally screws me up now. So I'm starting to get more sensitive again to it. So um I've just got to be wary of what I'm looking at, I guess.
Well, on that note, let's jump right into Frankenstein, because you got a little kid here that is it stresses me out. Like, the whole time I was talking to a friend about this, and I'm just like, I was raised Catholic. Okay, so like, if you skipped school, they're calling your. That's the main difference between like private school and public school, right? If you don't show up to public school, there's too many kids, you get lost. You don't show up to private school, they call your parents, they leave messages with their work, they call your grandparents, they call anybody whose number they have, and like, hey, Blake's not here. Where's he at? Is he sick or is he being an idiot? And then like so seeing this kid, and it's like he loses a family member, right? But he ends up in this like evil scientist laboratory, right? And it builds great tension, and I love it. And he's such a cool character, right? And the reason why he's there is awesome. So it was very much like a new Frankenstein experience for me, and I would love for other people to experience that as well. But anyways, I've read 2 issues of this. The kid is still safe, but he's not. He's alive, but is he safe? I don't know, right? And what's is there a stress writing this character, writing these situations? Like, is that what does that bring out some horror on the
Um,
page?
it does kind of, but more so it just makes me feel introspective of my own relationships and how I want to bring my own experiences as a father and as a son to this character to add some genuine emotion there and to make it feel real and lived in. But part of the reason that I wanted to introduce this new character or a couple new characters was that I think that it gives more of a sense of drama to the story when you don't know what's going to happen to Paul, who's the main young man character. Whereas in the movie, we know exactly where Frankenstein ends up and the monster ends up and Elizabeth ends up and all those characters that were in the movie, we know what's going to happen if you've seen the movie. But for any new characters, there's more of more urgency there and more unpredictability. And I really wanted to have the readers invest in someone that they didn't know what was going to happen. So that was part of the primary goal with creating that character. And just to see the story from a completely new perspective that we haven't been privy to yet.
That seems like, from a creator standpoint and writerly standpoint, right? It seems very, very smart, but it also seems like really tricky. How hard was it to come up with a character? Was it always a kid, this new character, or like were you bouncing around a few ideas to like see where the most kind of like unique or point of view would be, like, in introducing it to this tale that everybody knows?
Well, Paul was like kind of the first thing I thought of when I was approached about the gig. I just thought it would be really interesting to see this from a kid's perspective and to add that innocence to the viewpoint. So he was the first thing that I thought of, and I had a completely different direction for the story originally, and that changed to focus more on what the story became. But through all the multiple versions of this story, Paul was one of the one things that stayed throughout them. This kid who was the son of one of the body parts that was used in the creation of the monster. So just the idea that there was an attachment there, that there was emotional connection between someone else not involved in the experiment to the monster, I thought was a really interesting thing that I wanted to explore. And that's where that came from in terms of the storytelling and the idea.
Very cool. How, or is that something that's easy for you to do? Like how often when you're creating something do you kind of like let go of an idea and let your character go to like naturally to a new place, or let the story go to a place you didn't, because like that's hard for, so it's very hard for like people that are very, structure is an art itself, right? And so sometimes when you
Yeah.
like when you hammer out that structure and you get it down, you rigidly attach yourself to it, right? But I've also heard when you let that go and sometimes let these characters do or say something you didn't plan on, or let the story take a turn, you can find magic there. Is that hard for you to let go and let that happen?
No, I think because of my many years just doing primarily art, the way that I work is very intuitive, and I'm a big fan of scrapping something that's not working and just starting right over from the beginning. So I find for me, if something's not working, I'm really quick to just scrap it and start over and maybe take some pieces of the original idea or the original artwork and integrate them into the new piece. But for me, I don't think it's good to dwell on something for too long because then it just stagnates and you get hyper focused on details that really don't matter, and my brain just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. So for me personally, it helps to just throw it out, to kill your darlings, which is like a big thing that writers say, don't be afraid to kill your darlings. Um, because if you become too attached to your own characters or your own stories, then it takes away from the part of your brain that's actually supposed to be the artist that's telling the story. Um, so yeah, I'm a big fan of just destroying the things that you set up for something better. And I do love not being too strict with the narrative arc that I've set up before I've started working, because usually I outline everything pretty tightly, and then when I get into the scripting of things change, and so I feel like it's good to just let your characters speak on the page. Sometimes you're even surprised when you're writing dialogue and you're just going spur of the moment and speaking from the voice of your character as you're writing, and the characters will say something that surprises you, which is a really interesting thing about writing that I love. It's like the characters kind of exist on their own in your mind and you don't have full control of them. They're in your subconscious speaking to you and you're just putting it down on the paper, and it's a really interesting and fun feeling, and it's one of the best parts of storytelling.
That's awesome. Now you've shown, speaking of like some of the best parts of storytelling, I feel like you're very good at, you're very good at a lot of different things. But you draw like glares and eyes really well. Like they convey a lot of emotion, and it sucks sometimes because sometimes that emotion is pain. And like and it's like I'm thinking of like sometimes in like Silver Coin, and it's like you could almost like feel that knife go in, right? And it's like, oh, like it's not a good reader feeling, but it's impressive,
Mhm.
right? And it's that makes for good horror, right? I don't want to like sit and whistle and sip tea while I'm reading horror, right? Like keep me on the edge of my seat and make me sweat a little. You showed, with with Silver Coin, you kind of went through history. You did all these different locales, all these different times, and then even like went like far into the future, right? Now with Frankenstein, you're back into simpler times. No one's got cell phones. Right. The electricity we need comes from the sky. That's like yeah, but you did some really cool things in the laboratory. It reminded me of the old like Wrightson Mary Shelley illustrated Frankenstein. That's like
Mhm.
one of my prized possessions, right? And like, but those illustrations are so crazy. But he did a lot of like bird cage looking apparatus. There was a lot of that, and I was like, and it was very intricate, right? And you included some of that in your layouts. Was that a nod to him and that like, or was that is
No,
that just old time gadgetry?
I think it's just like a classic, iconic depiction of what a mad scientist might have in their lab from the ideas of set designers in their 30s. A lot of those things that Wrightson did in his version of Frankenstein was um, inspired by the 1930s Universal Monsters Frankenstein. So I think that we are both coming from some of the same inspirations, but mm, my art is very different than Wrightson. I think Wrightson is an incredible artist, and his rendering and his draftsmanship is on another level. Like I kind of think he's almost untouchable. So in my mind, I said, I could never be Wrightson. I could never draw like him, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to try and do what I can do best. And obviously he's an inspiration to me in many, many ways in my career, but I didn't want to go too deep into the way that he told the story or he drew the monster or drew the lab. But I do think that like some of the similarities there, especially in the lab design, all come back to that initial super iconic version of the lab from the Universal Monsters movie in 1931. And
Okay.
from Bride of Frankenstein, which also has some incredible set design in it as well. And I use some of those ideas in that in my version as well.
Nice. And I know you probably can't. Well, if you could totally explain it, you probably wouldn't, because like who wants to give away like the secret recipe, right? But like I mentioned how good you are in like that the glare and using those like that physical image of an eye to like push feeling and emotion and terror across the page. Again, not something people do very easily. And you do it
Mhm.
you do it a lot of different ways. Like it doesn't have to be like abject horror. It doesn't have to be like blood curl screaming pain, right? There I'm thinking of like the good doctor's wife, right? When she's just kind of like this isn't my husband and I miss him, and like even then, it's little moments like that, like the soft hurts and stuff that we can relate to. You do that really well too. Like how do you emote like that on the page? Like because again, it's a skill not everybody has.
I think it comes from actually what I just enjoy drawing. Like for me, I've never been a guy, even as a kid growing up loving comics, I wasn't super interested in drawing these big, huge, bombastic action moments. And as fun as they were to draw, I always wanted to draw like portraits of my favorite superheroes. It's just what I had fun with. I loved drawing my friends and their faces and people and the way that they emoted and reacted. And as a storyteller, I'm very invested in character and character arcs and character work. And such a big, important piece of that is the way that characters emote and their body language and their acting. So for me, I have a lot of fun really trying to create a body language in a specific way that characters act through the imagery of the comic. And I try and have characters speak to each other without words by the way that they're hunched or the way that they're looking off to the side, and those things are really important to me, and there's things that I prioritize in storytelling, just because that's what I enjoy to do. But I think that there are artists that are much better than me that also just want to prioritize those big, huge, dynamic poses and like superhero moments and action scenes. But for me, that wasn't like a huge priority in this book. And I don't think that it's always a priority in horror in general, because a lot of horror is about the lead up and the build up and pacing out a page turn so that then you turn the page and you have this really atmospheric, tense, horrific scene. So I think it just comes from where we're putting our energy as artists, and I've chosen to really focus on the acting.
Nice. Well, yeah, it's in what you're doing now. I think it's a great focus. Like I said, you do body horror great. You draw great wounds. You really do. I mean, it's a weird compliment to give someone, I feel like, but
Yeah.
I mean, like when you start hacking people up on a page at a summer camp, and little Susie's wearing somebody's face as a mask, it's got to look cool, right? When it would be a bummer to have a crazy scene like that and be like, man, that they just really didn't deliver, like what happened here? You don't want to be the guy who like can't draw body parts when you got piles of body parts around, like so,
Yeah.
and you do that a lot in Frankenstein too. I've know like there's parts where, as when we're exploring everything, as a we kind of follow these characters around, and I love it because there's this really cool voyeuristic feel that like is a normative thing in comics, but it feels more voyeuristic in Frankenstein. Like it really does. It feels like I'm not supposed to be there either. Kind of. It feels like
Yeah.
I'm sneaking around. So like
Yeah.
you and a lot of that has to do with like color and paint and stuff too. Like everybody, all you did so great. Lettering's good too. All these books, all these Universal Monsters books have been like top tier. I was gonna ask, right? So like,
Yeah.
is this like a who's who of who's kicking ass in comics right now, dropping these books, right? So when they come to you and they're like, you're gonna do Frankenstein, or how'd that feel? Like what was your thought when you got the gig?
I mean, James set a really high bar for everyone. James is Tiny and is one of the best doing it right now. So having to follow him and then Rom and Dan, it's, three of the best writers in comics, and I'm just a lowly art monkey, right? So I've done a bunch of writing, obviously, and I do think that people resonate with my voice and with the things that I've done. So it's very flattering that, I have acquired a fan base for my writing as well. But I was approached by Alex, the editor, who's also, the genius that's put these books together and assembled the creative teams. He's the editor I worked with on Creep Show. So after we finished Creep Show, he had said, I think you'd be perfect for one of the Universal Monsters books. And we chatted about Frankenstein was instantly the character that I was drawn to. And I've been on so many like, superhero books that are big marquee characters and over the years. And I think a lot of my hesitation or my nervousness around big projects has kind of gone now, just from having done it so much and knowing how tight deadlines are. I don't really have the luxury of getting too anxious or nervous because I just have to dive into work. And I think that because you go from, do you want to do this project? Okay, let's start like tomorrow, or I'm deep in something, and as soon as I finish that thing, I'm gonna go headfirst into this. And because the work is so all encompassing, and yeah, I have to use every single little part of my brain because I'm writing and drawing and co-coloring it and doing some of the design work as well, and doing all writing or doing all the hand-drawn SFX. It's like everything in my brain is being used just to make the best comic I can. It's like I don't even have room to be nervous about it anymore. This week, this is when I get nervous, is when the book's about to come out, and I just hope that people who are fans of the characters enjoy the comic.
Nice. Well, I feel like you don't have anything to worry about it in that regard, but I also know like, yeah, you're like, that's sweet, Blake, but we'll see when the book, like the book's not out yet, so
Yeah.
that is going to be a stress, but I didn't even think about that, how quick some things move and how quickly things like fall on your lap and when production like has to start, right? And yeah, sometimes you're like, ooh, this sounds cool. And then you just run with it. You don't have time to like think too hard about it. And it's just like, you got to do it. You got to get the job done and then breathe later. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, no time to durdle, just get her done. I mean, I'm from a very blue collar family too, so that's kind of our ethos is just like get your hands dirty, put your nose to the grindstone, and get the work done the best you can.
Nice. That's a good way to be. I mean, looking at you and looking at your career, I feel like hard work pays off. It's good to see. I know you're a busy guy. We're running out of time, but there's something not just universal in the pictures and in the monsters and in the studio, right? But there's something like there's this universal love of these creatures, and not only is it like universal, but it's timeless, right? Like
Yeah.
even people who aren't into horror like know these characters and know these specific archetypes of the characters, right? What do you think it is? Like what is it about these monsters, that time period? Like is it like a little bit of innocence mixed in the horror, or like, you know, because it's not, some of it's not even nostalgia really, because some of us are out on the outskirts of that time period, right? So what do you think? What is our fascination come? Like why is it we're making comic books of these characters decades later? And not only that, like they're selling, they're doing well. They're, like people love this stuff.
Well, I mean, if you look at the Western obsession with Halloween, with if you just look at the amount of people that flock to the theaters to see horror movies, I think there's like an excitement about horror, and that there's the almost like a feeling of community, like you're all experiencing this fear and terror at the same time, and it links you together as an audience. So there's that reason for it, but also, these are the most iconic versions of these characters as well. So even if you have a passing interest in Frankenstein or Dracula or the creature from the Black Lagoon, like these are the versions of the characters, and every character or every take on these characters that you see now, whether consciously or subconsciously, is influenced by these versions. So I think bringing these back to comics in this way is a really interesting idea to see, like, how can we modernize these stories that are 100 years old almost, right? And we've seen these versions of these characters for 100 years, based on this specific take on them, the universal version. So, like, how do we make that interesting to a modern audience? And the thing is that these stories, when you get down to the nitty gritty of them, they're timeless. The themes are timeless. That fathers and sons and ambition and the way that these things take you away from the things that matter, like all of these themes are still relevant and still relatable. So it's just finding ways to tap into them and make them interesting for the new audience that are going to be reading them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because I may not be conquering life and death at my day job, right? But I definitely spend too much time working sometimes, and
Yeah,
and ignore and ignore emotionally things I shouldn't. I'm not like married or have kids or anything, right? So it's not like I have like children running around, no one's watching them. But like, like it's
right.
like there's been time, like, I since this whole comic book journey started, right? There's been a lot of weekends where like I'm like, shit, when's the last time I saw my friends? And but it's you focus on the grind, you lose track of it, and then yeah, all of a sudden you're raising a monster, turning into a monster yourself, kind of, right?
Exactly. Yeah. See, it's all relatable, it's all relevant. So all these stories are timeless, and I'm sure there'll be new versions of them again in 100 years.
If you would have gotten a choice, like right off the bat, like if they would have set you down and said, hey Michael, we're bringing these monsters back, each of them are going to get a mini series. Like if you got to take your pick, would it have been Frankenstein, or where would you have went?
No, it would have been Frankenstein because I actually had my pick from a bunch of them, not Dracula or Creature, because those were already in production when I came into the Universal Monsters group. But I chose Frankenstein out of five or six different options, and I think I still would have chose the same, even if Dracula and Creature were available. I mean, there's something appealing about doing a Dracula story, but I also think that the Frankenstein story plays more to some of my sensibilities as a horror artist, and I think that the way that it taps into body horror allowed me to do some fun things with my art that I was really excited about that I wouldn't have been able to do in the Dracula story.
Cool. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
like I said, I got to see the first two issues. Absolutely blown away. Can't wait. The bummer about that though is like now, like the wait for issue three is real long.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, true.
so there's a blessing and a curse to being one of the cool scene kids, right? But it's gonna be a long wait, but a worthwhile wait. I'm so excited to see what else you bring in and out of the laboratory, and what horrors Paul and Fritz and all them stumble into. I'm excited, man. It's gonna be a cool. Well, I guess. Well, nope. I'm not. I almost said a spoiler. I
I know you
almost,
did. I was waiting for you to say it, but you held back. Good job. Very proud of you.
That's a right? Like, man, well, the host actually he read my book too well. But yeah, everybody for real, you got to check out Frankenstein. If you haven't checked out the other Universal Monsters books, really encourage it. We got Dracula, we got Creature from the Black Lagoon, and now Frankenstein. There's three. That's it right now, right? And then
Right
yeah,
now, yeah.
and more. And it sounds like I figured more would be coming because there's a certain furry fanged guy no one's been talking about yet that I'm waiting. That's the I'm kind of excited for that. But yeah, one of the cool things about these has just been seeing who's assigned to these books when they pop up too, because it's just like whoa. So yeah, I'm so happy for you, dude. I can't wait to see how the other ways you terrify me. A bunch of my friends asked, and I said I would ask, even though you probably can't say anything. Silver Coin, everybody loves it. Volume 1 and 2, everybody loved it. They're planning on a hardcover, the hardcover coming, right? Of the 2 volumes collected, I heard
Well, there's
maybe or
there's 3 volumes now, and it's coming back next year.
okay,
And I would love to do a hardcover, but there's nothing concrete.
okay.
But I would love to collect the first 4 volumes in a hardcover eventually, but I need to talk to Image about that. So no concrete plans yet, but hopefully in the future.
All right. Well, but there is going to be you're going to come back and scare us a little bit more. It sounds like so that's
I can't help the silver coin is just going to go forever, I think. Whether it's always going to be monthly or not, it's just like that coin is going to roll around and have horrible things happen to it and around it for a very long time. But it's not always going to be a monthly, that's for sure, because I have a lot of other projects I also want to draw and write and be a part of.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, you gotta get out there and do some other fun stuff. But that's cool. That's exciting. Very very cool stuff. I'm always excited when I see your name come up on a page, sir, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
No, it's been great chatting, man. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Awesome. I'll hold you to that. I'll come back begging for sure. I like you're awesome to nerd out with. I appreciate it. Everybody, if you didn't pick up on it, I'm very excited about this Frankenstein book, and you should be too. So get out there, check it out. Tell your shops you need it. It's coming out next week, so I would pick up that first issue, but more importantly, tell your shop to throw the whole thing on there. Like the pre-orders are important. They really help. Remember to love more, hate less, and read comics. You know how we do things here. I love all you so much. Thanks for listening. Michael, thank you again. Best of luck with this new book and all your future shenanigans, man.
Thanks so much, and thanks again for having me.